The afternoon sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the quiet suburban streets as I trudged home from the bus stop. My mind wandered to simple comforts, a warm slice of cake on the kitchen counter, maybe a hastily scribbled note that read, "Happy birthday, my son." It wasn't about extravagance, it was about acknowledgement, a small gesture to remind me that someone remembered this day mattered. But as I turned onto the gravel path leading to the house, the air felt unusually cold for late spring. The warmth I had imagined evaporated like morning mist under the weight of an unsettling stillness. Before I could even reach the porch steps, Brian, my stepfather, emerged from the doorway, his towering figure blocking the light spilling out behind him. In one hand, he clutched my backpack, its left strap dangling uselessly after being yanked off a hook. No greeting, no pretense of civility. Just those words, sharp and cutting like shattered glass, "I've taken care of you long enough. Get out of my house." My breath hitched, caught somewhere between disbelief and horror. For a moment, I thought I'd misheard him. Surely, he couldn't mean what I thought he did, not today, not on my 18th birthday. But there was no mistaking the venom in his voice or the way he tossed my bag onto the tiled floor with a dismissive thud. My legs felt rooted to the spot, palms slick with sweat as I tried to form words. You can't just throw me out," I stammered, my voice trembling. "This is my mom's house. It's mine too." He smirked then, a cruel twist of his lips that made my stomach churn. "Go ask your mom," he sneered, folding his arms across his chest. His tone hardened into something metallic, unyielding. "You're 18 now. You're grown. That means you're on your own. I don't owe you a damn thing." Each word hit like a hammer blow, echoing in my ears alongside the deafening rhythm of my heartbeat. I wanted to argue, to scream, to demand answers, but before I could muster any response, another voice sliced through the tension. From the second-floor balcony came Casey, Brian's daughter from a previous marriage. She leaned lazily against the railing, chewing gum loudly enough for every sticky pop to carry down to where I stood frozen below. Her eyes gleamed with mockery as she drawled, "Oh really? You sure about that?" Casey descended the stairs slowly, deliberately, her movements dripping with disdain. When she reached the bottom, she planted herself directly in front of me, pointing at my discarded backpack like it was trash. "If you forgot anything, better come back before tonight," she spat. "That room's mine tomorrow." Before turning away, she added with a smug grin, "Happy birthday, Thomas." Her words landed like a slap, stinging far more than I cared to admit. I clenched my fist so tightly my nails dug crescents into my palms, trying, and failing, to steady my breathing. The world around me seemed to blur, the familiar contours of the house suddenly alien, hostile. This wasn't happening. It couldn't be real. Desperation clawed at my throat as I pulled out my phone and dialed my mom. My hands shook as I pressed the call button, clinging to the hope that she would intervene, that she would tell Brian this was wrong. The line rang 3 times before she answered, her voice calm but distant, layered with the hum of background traffic. "I'm here. What's going on, Thomas?" I swallowed hard, forcing myself to speak despite the lump lodged in my throat. "Mom, Brian just kicked me out of the house," I said, my voice cracking under the weight of betrayal. There was a pause on the other end, brief but suffocating. Then her reply came, flat and final, "Brian's right. You need to grow up." Those 6 words shattered whatever fragile illusion I'd been holding on to. My chest tightened, each beat of my heart feeling like it might tear loose entirely. I tried again, pleading now. You know what they're doing, and you didn't stop them? How could you let him do this to me?" Her sigh was heavy, almost resigned. "Thomas, you're 18 now. It's time for you to be independent. Brian's just doing what needs to be done." I stared at the screen as it faded to black, her disconnection leaving me hollow. Something bitterly simple sank in, she had chosen him over me. Chosen convenience over love, indifference over loyalty. And suddenly, I wasn't just standing outside the house, I was standing alone, utterly abandoned by the people who were supposed to care. For nearly 10 minutes, I remained rooted to the spot, staring at the old backpack lying silent on the ground like a cruel monument to everything I'd lost. Every instinct screamed at me to move, to fight back, to reclaim some semblance of control, but all I could do was stand there, numb and defeated. Eventually, the biting chill of the evening air jolted me into motion. I started walking aimlessly, my thoughts tangled in a web of anger, hurt, and disbelief. After what felt like hours, I found myself pulling out my phone again. This time, I called Uncle Robert, the only person who had ever looked at me without judgment. As the dial tone rang, I realized this single act might change everything, or at least give me a fighting chance. The moment I stepped into Uncle Robert's car, the world outside seemed to blur. My hands were still trembling, not from fear anymore, but from a strange mix of anger and disbelief. How could they do this? How could my own mother stand by while Brian threw me out like yesterday's trash? But as we drove away from that house, the house I once thought was mine in every way except on paper, I felt something else creeping in, uncertainty. Where would I go now? What did I have left? Uncle Robert didn't say much at first. He just gripped the steering wheel tightly, his jaw clenched as though he was holding back words too heavy to speak. Then, after about 10 minutes of silence, he pulled over to the side of the road. Turning off the engine, he looked at me with an intensity that made my chest tighten. "Hang on a second," he said firmly before pulling out his phone. I watched him dial a number, his fingers moving with purpose. My stomach churned as I realized who he was calling, my mom. The woman who had hung up on me earlier, dismissing my pain with a cold indifference that still stung like salt on an open wound. A part of me wanted to stop him, to tell him it wasn't worth it, but another part, the part that craved answers, urged me to stay quiet. When she picked up, her voice came through the speaker, clipped and distant. "Linda, I'm with Thomas. He called me and said Brian kicked him out of the house. What the hell is going on?" Uncle Robert's tone was sharp, leaving no room for evasion. There was a pause on the other end, brief but suffocating. Then her reply came, equally cold and defensive. "This is my family's business. Stay out of it." Uncle Robert let out a short laugh, a dry, humorless sound that sent chills down my spine. "All right then," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Consider this your missed chance to apologize to Thomas. I'll bet you anything you'll leave that house within a week." His words hit me like a thunderclap. Leave the house? Within a week? I turned to look at him, confusion etched across my face. Before I could ask what he meant, he ended the call and turned to me, his expression softening slightly. "Kid," he began, his voice steady but firm, "there are things you need to know. About that house. About what your grandfather left behind." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. My grandfather's name had always been spoken with reverence in our family, but I never imagined his legacy would tie directly to the chaos unfolding around me. Uncle Robert didn't elaborate further, instead, he gestured for me to get back in the car. "We'll talk more when we get home," he promised. By the time we arrived at Uncle Robert's house, the sun had dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the driveway. His wife, Aunt Helen, greeted us at the door with her usual warmth, a gentle smile and a handshake that somehow grounded me despite everything. "You've lost weight, Thomas," she said softly as she poured me a glass of water. Her eyes lingered on mine for a moment longer than necessary, as if searching for cracks beneath the surface. Later that evening, their two daughters, Jenna and Ellie, came bounding downstairs, each clutching a stuffed animal. They looked up at me with wide, curious eyes. "Is Thomas staying, Mom?" Jenna asked brightly. "He can sleep in our room if he wants. We always sleep together anyway." Ellie, a little older but equally kind, gently touched my shoulder. "So now you don't have to spend your birthday alone." Their words caught me off guard. For the first time in hours, maybe even days, I felt a flicker of warmth spreading through me, a quiet joy that softened the edges of my despair. Then, just as dinner was wrapping up, Uncle Robert leaned forward, his gaze fixed on mine. "Thomas," he said slowly, deliberately, "have you ever wondered why that house was already there when you were little?" I hesitated, unsure where this was going. I just assumed it was Mom's or something Dad left behind. Uncle Robert shook his head gently, setting his coffee cup on the table. "No," he said, his voice low but steady. "That house originally belonged to your grandfather." My heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" Before he answered, he reached into the drawer of the coffee table and pulled out a thin folder. Its pages were yellowed with age, but the bold line at the top of the first page stood out clearly, "Thomas Campbell. When your grandfather passed away, he wrote a will," Uncle Robert explained, his voice almost reverent. "He left that house to you, Thomas Campbell. Legally, it's been yours since you were 8 years old. Temporary guardianship was handed to your parents because of your age, but the ownership never changed." The room seemed to spin as the truth sank in. All these years, I'd lived in that house under the assumption that it belonged to my mother, or worse, to Brian. But the reality was far more complicated, and far more infuriating. Uncle Robert placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder. "They hid this from you, Thomas. They kept you in the dark so they could use that house however they wanted. But not anymore." A surge of determination welled up inside me. If they thought they could take everything from me without consequence, they were wrong. Dead wrong. The next morning, Uncle Robert poured me another cup of coffee and said gently, "It's time you met someone who can help you." We drove to a small office tucked inside an old stately building in the heart of the city. When we arrived, Uncle Robert led me down a long hallway before stopping in front of a door that read Mr. Stevens, attorney at law. As soon as we stepped inside, Mr. Stevens greeted us with a calm, professional smile. After hearing my story, he nodded thoughtfully. Based on this will, the house is legally yours, he confirmed. You have every right to reclaim it. It's your rightful inheritance from your grandfather. With those words, a plan began to form, a path forward that would lead me straight back to the house I had been unjustly thrown out of. The next morning, as the sun rose over the horizon, casting a pale golden glow across the neighborhood, we stood in front of the house that had been my home for most of my life. My hands were clenched tightly around the folder containing the will, its edges digging into my palms like an anchor grounding me to reality. Uncle Robert stood beside me, his presence solid and reassuring, while Mr. Stevens adjusted his tie with precision, ready to enforce the law on my behalf. I hesitated only for a moment before stepping toward the gate. The house loomed ahead, familiar yet foreign now, a place I once called safe but which had betrayed me in unimaginable ways. Are you ready for this? Uncle Robert asked quietly, his voice steady but laced with concern. I nodded without looking at him, gripping the folder even tighter. This wasn't just about reclaiming property anymore, it was about reclaiming myself. Uncle Robert knocked firmly on the door, each knock echoing through the quiet morning air. Footsteps approached from inside, heavy and hesitant. When the door opened, my mother and Brian stood there, their expressions shifting rapidly between surprise, confusion, and anger. My mom's eyes locked onto mine, searching for answers or perhaps forgiveness, but all I felt was resolve. I'm here, I said, my voice low but unwavering. This is my house, and you no longer have any right to be here. For a brief second, they froze, as if trying to process what I had just said. Then Brian stepped forward, his face reddening with rage. What the hell are you talking about, Thomas? You can't just come back here and throw us out. Before I could respond, Mr. Stevens stepped forward, his tone calm but commanding. According to the will left by Thomas's grandfather, this house legally belongs to him. He has every right to be here and to take full possession of this property. My mother's eyes darted between Uncle Robert, Mr. Stevens, and me, her lips trembling slightly. But, this is our home, she whispered, her voice tinged with desperation. It sounded more like she was trying to convince herself than anyone else. Not anymore, I replied, my voice firm. This is my home. You and Brian have no right to stay here now. Mr. Stevens turned to them, his expression cold and unyielding. Per the will and Thomas's legal ownership, you no longer have any right to remain here. I'm asking you to vacate the premises immediately. The words hung in the air like a storm cloud, heavy and suffocating. My mother and Brian exchanged a glance, their faces twisted with disbelief and fury. My mom turned to me, her voice rising sharply. Thomas, are you out of your mind? This is my home. You can't throw your own mother out. I didn't flinch. Instead, I met her gaze head on, my heart pounding but my resolve unshaken. You chose him over me, I said, my voice cutting through the tension like a blade. When Brian threw me out, you didn't protect me. Now I'm protecting myself. Suddenly, Brian lunged forward, his fists clenched, his entire body coiled like a spring ready to snap. Who the hell do you think you are, kid? He spat, pointing a shaking finger at my face. You don't get to throw us out. Before he could take another step, Uncle Robert moved swiftly, positioning himself between us like an immovable wall. His voice was sharp and authoritative. Back off, Brian. Don't you dare lay a hand on him. If you try anything, I'll have you charged with assault. Brian froze, chest heaving, his rage colliding with the realization that he couldn't overpower us, not legally, not physically. For a moment, the room fell silent, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. Then my mom spoke again, her voice cracking under the weight of desperation. Please, Thomas. Can't you let Brian and me stay? We were wrong, I know we were. I'm begging you. A part of me wavered, just for a second. Memories of childhood flickered in my mind, her laughter, her hugs, the promises she'd made when my dad passed away. But then yesterday flashed back vividly, her silence as Brian threw me out, her refusal to stand up for me. She had chosen him over me, and now she wanted mercy. Too late. I've had enough, I said, my voice steel hard. I'm protecting myself. Just then, Casey stormed into the room, her eyes blazing with fury. Who do you think you are, kicking my dad out of this house? You have no right to do this, Thomas. Her voice sliced through the air, sharp and venomous. You heartless bastard. You're throwing my dad out over some stupid house? Do you even know everything he's done for you? I stood still, fighting to keep my composure despite the fury bubbling inside me. Before I could respond, Mr. Stevens stepped forward, his tone icy and uncompromising. Casey, I'm going to need you to stop right now. He gestured toward the security camera mounted on the wall. Remember, everything you do here is being recorded. Do not insult or threaten Thomas again. Casey froze, her mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. Finally, she hissed, You'll regret this, Thomas. Mr. Stevens took a single step closer, his voice unshaken. "Leave now, Casey, or I will call for immediate legal intervention." The standoff stretched for several agonizing seconds, the tension palpable. But in the end, there was nothing left for them to say. They knew they had lost. The standoff between us and my stepfamily reached its boiling point when Casey stormed into the room, her face flushed with anger. Her eyes darted furiously between me, Uncle Robert, and Mr. Stevens. "Who do you think you are, kicking my dad out of this house?" she spat, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "You have no right to do this, Thomas." I stood still, clenching my fists tightly at my sides, fighting to keep my composure despite the rage bubbling inside me. I didn't say a word, not because I couldn't, but because I knew better than to let her provoke me further. Before I could respond, Mr. Stevens stepped forward, his tone icy and unyielding. "Casey," he said firmly, pointing toward the security camera mounted on the wall, "everything you're saying is being recorded. I'm warning you, do not insult or threaten Thomas again." Casey froze mid-rant, her mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. For a moment, it seemed as though she might back down. But then her expression twisted into something darker, more defiant. "You'll regret this, Thomas," she hissed through clenched teeth before turning on her heel and storming off. Mr. Stevens watched her leave, his gaze unwavering. Then, addressing my mother and Brian, he added coldly, "If any of you attempt to trespass here again, legal action will follow immediately. This isn't a negotiation, it's an order." The weight of his words hung heavy in the air. My mother's shoulders slumped visibly, defeat etched across her face. Brian, however, remained silent, his jaw clenched so tightly I thought it might crack under the pressure. As the officers began escorting them toward the door, my mom turned to me one last time, her voice trembling with desperation. "Thomas, please, just give me 1 hour. That's all I ask. Let me pack what I need. I'll leave right after." For a brief moment, I hesitated. Part of me wanted to grant her that small mercy, to offer her one final chance at dignity. But another part of me, the part that had endured years of neglect and betrayal, hardened against her plea. Finally, I exhaled slowly, meeting her gaze head-on. "Fine," I said, my voice steady but firm. "You have 1 hour. But I'll be here the entire time. You pack under my supervision, Uncle Robert, and Mr. Stevens." She nodded silently, her expression clouded with sorrow and resignation. There was no argument, no pleading, just quiet acceptance. During that hour, the house felt eerily silent except for the sound of hurried footsteps and the rustle of belongings being shoved into boxes. My mother moved quickly, almost frantically, while Brian lingered in the background, his movements stiff and mechanical. Casey stayed outside, pacing angrily near their car, occasionally shooting venomous glares in my direction. Uncle Robert and Mr. Stevens kept watch over every move, ensuring nothing valuable, financial or sentimental, was taken without oversight. It was clear they weren't going to let even the smallest detail slip past unnoticed. As I observed them packing, memories flooded back uncontrollably. Images of birthday dinners, family game nights, and lazy Sunday mornings played in my mind like a broken record. Each memory carried both warmth and pain, a reminder of what once was and how far we'd fallen apart. But amidst the nostalgia, a strange sense of clarity emerged. These people hadn't been a family to me in years. They had used me, manipulated me, and ultimately discarded me when it suited them. Now, standing here as the rightful owner of this house, I realized I wasn't grieving the loss of a family, I was shedding the weight of false expectations. When the hour was up, I approached my mother, who was kneeling beside an open suitcase, her hands trembling as she folded a sweater. "That's enough," I said quietly, my voice gentle but firm. "Your things have been packed. Whatever you didn't get to today, I'll leave outside the gate in 3 days. You can come pick it up then." She looked up at me, tears streaming down her cheeks, but said nothing. Slowly, she rose to her feet, grabbed the suitcase, and walked toward the door. Brian followed silently, his expression unreadable. Before stepping outside, my mother paused briefly, glancing back at the house one last time. Her eyes met mine, filled with a mix of sadness, regret, and perhaps a flicker of understanding. Then, without another word, she turned and walked away, disappearing into the car with Brian and Casey trailing behind. As their vehicle pulled out of the driveway, a wave of relief washed over me. For the first time in years, I felt truly alone, but not in a lonely way. It was peaceful, liberating even. The tension that had weighed down every corner of this house for so long finally lifted, leaving behind only silence. I wandered through the rooms, taking in the emptiness around me. Every piece of furniture, every photograph on the walls, carried echoes of the past. But instead of sadness, I felt a renewed sense of ownership. This was my space now, a blank canvas ready to be reshaped into something entirely new. In the living room, I found myself drawn to the window overlooking the front yard. Outside, a neighbor I barely recognized waved at me from across the street. "Hey, Thomas," he called out warmly. "Heard about everything. Just want you to know, we've got your back if you ever need anything." His words caught me off guard, but they also brought a small smile to my lips. For so long, I'd convinced myself that I was fighting this battle alone. But maybe, just maybe, there were people willing to stand by me after all. As night fell, I settled onto the couch, staring out at the star-filled sky. The house felt different now, quieter, lighter, yet somehow fuller. Full of possibility. Full of hope. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I allowed myself to believe that maybe, just maybe, I deserved this second chance. For months have passed since that fateful day when I stood on the porch of my house, watching my mother, Brian, and Casey disappear into the distance. The house feels different now, not just because it's empty of their presence, but because it's finally mine in every sense of the word. Every creak of the floorboards, every flicker of light through the windows, carries a new meaning. This isn't just a structure made of brick and mortar anymore, it's a symbol of everything I fought for, a testament to my resilience, my courage, and my determination to live freely. The first few days were strange, almost surreal. Silence filled every corner of the house, so thick it felt tangible. No arguments echoing down the hallway. No tension lingering in the air like an invisible storm cloud. It was unnerving at first, as though I'd forgotten how to exist without chaos surrounding me. But slowly, that silence transformed into something else, something beautiful. Peace. Quiet. Freedom. It wasn't easy, though. There were moments when doubt crept in, whispering cruel questions in the dead of night. Did you do the right thing? Could you have handled it differently? I wrestled with those thoughts, replaying memories of my childhood, the laughter, the hugs, the fleeting moments of warmth, and wondering if I had been too harsh. But then I reminded myself of the truth: they chose power over love, control over connection. And I chose me. Now, sitting here in the living room where so much of my life unfolded, I feel a profound sense of clarity. For years, I lived in a cage I didn't even realize existed, a prison built by manipulation, neglect, and misplaced loyalty. Breaking free wasn't just about reclaiming a house, it was about reclaiming myself. I've spent these past 4 months rediscovering who I am outside of their shadows. I started decorating the house, filling it with pieces that reflect my personality rather than theirs. Old furniture gave way to new beginnings. Walls once bare now hold photographs of places I've visited, dreams I want to chase, and people who truly matter. Even the scent of fresh paint feels like a promise, a clean slate ready to be written upon. But more importantly, I've learned to live honestly. I no longer twist myself into knots trying to please others or earn conditional love. I don't shrink myself to fit into spaces designed to suffocate me. Instead, I stand tall, unapologetically claiming my place in this world. And yet, I know not everyone will agree with the choices I made. Some might say I crossed a line by forcing my own mother out of her home. Others might argue that family should always come first, no matter what. To them, I simply ask, what would you have done? Would you have stayed silent while someone took away your dignity, your rights, your very identity? Or would you have fought back, even if it meant losing the illusion of a perfect family? To anyone reading this, anyone trapped in a similar situation, feeling used, silenced, or controlled by people you once called family, I want to tell you this: you deserve better. Don't be afraid to make the hard choice. Sometimes, the most significant shifts in life start with the smallest acts of courage. Cutting ties doesn't mean you hate them, it means you love yourself enough to prioritize your well-being. So, before I end this story, I leave you with one final question: do you think I was right or wrong for making my mother leave the house that legally belonged to me? If you believe I did the right thing, comment 1. If you think I went too far, comment 2. More importantly, share your perspective. Your voice matters, and your experiences can help others navigate their own struggles. If this story resonated with you, if it gave you strength, hope, or even just a moment of understanding, please share it. Let's keep learning, growing, and supporting each other through the challenges life throws our way. Together, we can build a community rooted in empathy, resilience, and freedom.